Pragmatists believe that meaning and mind arise in the context of social action. Charles S. Peirce is now sometimes credited with preparing the way for 20th century philosophy. He invented a form of semiotics, as did the French philosopher Saussure. Semiotics is the concept that words are arbitrary symbols that generate meaning. Peirce also believed that all knowledge is contingent, including scientific knowledge. He stated that there was not one ground place where inquiry and knowledge would stop, in other words, bottom out as an ultimate answer. His position was an important rejection of foundationalism. Peirce has been neglected, which is egregious, because he was an extremely important exponent of philosophy. He is one of America's most distinguished and original thinkers. William James thought that psychology should be more like the experimental sciences. He explained consciousness and its functions in evolutionary terms. He saw consciousness as a continuous flow. James' functionalism led him to believe that the cash value of certain ideas and beliefs was more important to the individuals than the truth of those ideas. If a concept such as religion offered a reward or return for a person, that idea was worthwhile. James did make statements that what people chose to invest in should have some external truth. There are scholars who think that James' ideas on cash value have been oversimplified. However, in the case of religion, James could not have thought it objectively true. He spent many years studying mediums and other extra or supernatural phenomena and never found any objective truth in any of them. Most atheists would not agree or find James' theory robust. Secular persons do not believe that living in illusion is a permanent or rational source of happiness. The pragmatist John Dewey was America's most well-known public intellectual. Dewey believed in an intelligent and scientific approach to everyday life. He found, as did Peirce, that scientific knowledge, as well as other forms of knowledge, was highly contingent. He was a process philosopher, as were most of the early pragmatists. This means that he believed all reality and all forms of knowledge and norms are subject to change. He had great influence on America's educational thought. In his laboratory school at the University of Chicago, children were encouraged to develop hypotheses and to test them. Dewey was a firm believer in democracy and in keeping religion out of the public school system. He attempted to take the supernatural and mythological out of religion and replace it with a concrete religious feeling devoid of transcendence. He stated that God is a human expression of the highest ideals. W.V. Quine was an important neo-pragmatist who put an end to the ascendancy of logical positivism by demonstrating how imprecise its core concepts were. We will be discussing logical positivism a little later. Richard Rorty was a contemporary neo-pragmatist, arguably the most well-known. He questioned philosophy and its purpose. He believed that scientific and philosophical terms were contingent and changed over time. Rorty developed the concept of ionism, in which people are aware of the placement of their ideas in history and society and understand their temporary condition. He was most interested in freeing people's minds from outdated philosophical concepts. Rorty was against foundationalism in science as well as religion. He wanted people's minds to be free without searching for new concepts to worship. Rorty called his atheism post-metaphysical, meaning that he had no surrogate for God. His aversion to institutionalized religion is well known. Neo-pragmatism has moved beyond the earlier theories of James and Dewey, and now some neo-pragmatists posit language and its relation to the external world as the most important subject for philosophy. The neo-pragmatists give credit to Dewey and James for rejecting many outworn methods and goals in philosophy. But they maintain that the original pragmatists try to reconstruct too many antiquated concepts. They find only language can serve as a basic function of philosophy, and that having accepted this fact, philosophies are free to fashion and work to new ends. These neo-pragmatists, although focusing on different concerns and subjects, have yet converged on naturalistic philosophy and its attendant pragmatism. They are all attempting, without a regression into foundationalism, and yet do not abandon to forge philosophies that deal with relativism, and yet do not abandon traditional questions of reality. Jürgen Habermas argues that reason is a kind of social practice of communication. Hilary Putnam believes that there is no God's eye view of knowledge, but that it is not needed, that objectivity can be found in a pragmatic realism. Joseph Margolis believes that while relativism obtains in many of the soft social sciences and humanist studies, there is a realistic view of the whole of our knowledge, especially in the hard sciences. Of most interest to this lecturer are Conrad Lawrence and Donald T. Campbell, who were interested in an evolutionary epistemology, and as some scholars state, believe that our cognitive capacities do actively project a perspective on the world, but one pragmatically shaped by survival in our real environment. Karl Popper stated this theory succinctly, that we have managed to acquire knowledge, even though much of it is a human projection, by trial and error in reality. He says that our hypotheses died in our place. Scholars also find it of interest that many of the battles of the contemporary theory of knowledge are being fought on a pragmatist turf. In the 20th century, W.V. Quine, George Santayana, and others argued that since naturalism had been so successful in science, that it should be used in philosophy to form a sort of continuum. At this point, I would like to segue into a small discussion concerning methodological naturalism, the more recent term coined in 1983 by Paul de Vries. It is different from metaphysical naturalism in that it is a disciplinary method that says nothing about God's existence, whereas metaphysical naturalism denies the existence of a transcendent God. Robert T. Pennock has been writing in this area since about 1996. He explains that the scientific method confines itself to natural explanations rather than assuming the existence or non-existence of the supernatural. He was an expert witness at the Dover trial, and the judge concluded that methodological naturalism is a ground rule of science today. For more on the Dover trial, please see the website AtheistScholar.org under Evolution versus Creationism. Karl Popper's view is interesting. He held that naturalism was an inductive theory of science. He acknowledged its utility as a means for inventing conjectures, but he had the following to say concerning naturalism. A naturalist philosophy methodology has its value, no doubt. I reject the naturalistic view. It is uncritical. Its upholders fail to notice that whenever they believe to have discovered a fact, they have only proposed a convention. Hence, the convention is liable to turn into a dogma. This criticism of the naturalistic view applies not only to its criterion of meaning, but also to its idea of science and consequently to its idea of empirical method. Popper believed that science should adopt a methodology based on falsifiability for demarcation, because no number of experiments can ever prove a theory, but a single experiment can contradict a theory. Popper holds that empirical theories are characterized by falsifiabilities. W.V. Quine has an interesting idea called Quinean replacement naturalism. It has relatively few supporters among philosophers, however. Yet I believe that many metaphysical naturalists have at least partially embraced this thinking. Quine believes that naturalism is the position that there is no higher tribunal for truth than natural science itself. There is no better method than the scientific method for judging the claims of science, and there is neither any need nor any play for a first philosophy, so to speak, such as abstract metaphysics or epistemology, that could stand behind and justify science and the scientific method. Therefore, philosophy should feel free to make use of the findings of scientists in their own pursuit, while also feeling free to offer criticism when those claims are ungrounded, confused, or inconsistent. In this way, philosophy becomes continuous with science. Naturalism is not a dogmatic belief that the modern view of science is entirely correct. Instead, it simply holds that those processes are what modern science is striving to understand. I am coming from a skeptical position, however. This is a difficult topic to approach because the assault on science and reason in the West has increased and is spreading. I do not want to associate myself with the forces of superstition and dubious research, such as prayer or placebos having a positive medical effect on people. But having studied the history of changes in scientific thought over a long period of time, would it not be more in the spirit of the best of science itself to maintain a slightly distant stance of wait and see when new research results are published and touted? There are several cogent arguments that we non-theists should pause over as correctives to the unnecessarily enthusiastic embrace of science. We of course rely on science for so many excellent things in our modern society, including medical advances, and few of us, including this lecturer, could ever conceive or wish to do without it. I do not think there is any need to enumerate the benefits we derive from science to this audience. But I think it is important to keep in mind both the cautions of David Hume, the 18th century skeptic philosopher, and the thinking of Thomas Kuhn in the 20th century. To avoid any misunderstanding, I am discussing both these very important thinkers in the spirit of objective scholarship. I of course have my own views concerning this issue, but the purpose of my paper and of my research is to query all sides of this question. Hume's statements on the reliability of science are logical, and no one has yet been able to refute his position completely. The issues he has raised are still argued about. This is a brief summary of Hume's position on knowledge. Much of our everyday beliefs about how the world works, including virtually all of our scientific reasoning, are based upon induction.